I got to tell you that I'm guessing that this is not a vintage Wisconsin team or a vintage Wisconsin defense. However, I can believe that the floor is fairly high for that program, and the worst Wisconsin teams that we ever see are still pretty darn good and got to be at least top 40 good, especially on defense. They're usually in the top 5 statistically and probably more in the 5 to 10 range when you add in the talent factor on defense. So if this is a bad Wisconsin defense, what Ohio State did, Kevin, on Saturday was still pretty spectacular, minus Jackson Smith and Jigba.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you look at an Ohio State team that doesn't have its leading receiver from last year in there, but they're able to just keep rolling through with wave after wave. They jump out to a 28-0 lead. I mean, it's like a hot knife through butter. I mean, Wisconsin had no answer for anything Ohio State did. There were a lot of concerns about what will Ohio State be able to do against, a perennial defensive powerhouse in terms of Wisconsin. They were able to throw at will. They were able to run at will. You sit there and you look at, really we'd be remiss if we don't talk about the emergence of Cade Stover. I mean, Cade Stover had a big impact early in the game. Teams are going to have to start defending him. And what is that going to mean elsewhere when teams actually have to start taking an Ohio State tight end as an offensive playmaking threat? What does that mean for everybody else, especially once JSN does return?
Yeah, all too very much impressed. The first 4 drives for the Ohio State offense were just works of art. I made a comment on radio this morning. I said they need to send those 4 possessions to the Louvre, because although they didn't go over the top for a 50-yard touchdown or anything silly like that, they were picking up yards in 12 and 15 and 18-yard chunks, running the ball, throwing the ball, dumping the ball off to the tight end for big yards. So everything was clicking. It was like they talk about, the basket must have looked a mile wide and a mile long, because as Ryan Day was looking down at his play sheet, he could just go like this and figured that whatever he was going to call was going to be a good call. So I was very impressed with everything that I saw out of those first 4 possessions. And 13 of the first 23 plays went for 10 yards or longer. And 3 of those were touchdowns inside the 5-yard line that couldn't go 10 yards. So, you look at it like that, it was very impressive.
Yeah, that was as good of a stretch of play calling as I've ever seen from Ryan Day or Tom Herman or Jim Tressel or Jim Bowman. Going back many, many years, certainly better than the latter. It was really impressive. They had Wisconsin's head spinning all over the place, and that's part of the joys of having a balanced attack. And they were able to outnumber Wisconsin's defense however they wanted to do it, and whichever item that Wisconsin gave Ohio State, they took it because they're as adept at running the ball as they are throwing. They're as adept at throwing out wide as they are over the middle, and they can stretch you vertically, they can stretch you horizontally, and then they can do the same thing with their running game with Mayan Williams and Travion Henderson. And right now, as long as CJ Stroud has time, he's been deadly. And I was even charting his incompletions. He threw 10 incompletions, and I think 3 were not accurate throws. Everything else was there or hit off of somebody's hands, or he was pressured. And so, another outstanding outing by an offense that is getting better and better and finding new weapons while they're waiting for Jackson Smith and Jigba to come back. And it's pretty amazing. You can lose Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, and essentially Jackson Smith and Jigba. And then just, I would say they missed a beat against Notre Dame because everybody was thrust into new situations a bit, but they've moved on now and they're doing well.
Because, Tony, that's a fascinating part of playing a team as good as Wisconsin on the defensive side, as good as Wisconsin typically is, because we know what the deal is athletically. We know that they're really good, but there are differences in matchups. But Wisconsin's usually so airtight. It's this they're figuring it out. They're there. They're in the position. Okay, Ohio State made a 15-yard play out of athleticism. They just be, and then maybe there's at some point they can't be perfect on the defensive scheme. There's a bust. There's something maybe that's going to break open a 14-10 game at some point, something like that. But yeah, from play one, it was like, did they prepare for any of this? Because it's the athleticism, but it's the nobody's in position.
Yeah, you're being out schemed and you're being out athleted, and that's a terrible place to be. And it kind of starts with Wisconsin having to deal with the fact that Ohio State spreads them out and then can run powerful football. And so you've got a Wisconsin defense that much of the time it's just 2 defensive linemen and then 2 outside linebackers and 2 inside linebackers because they need a 5th defensive back. And so where did they take that guy from? They took him from the defensive line. And if you're going to take somebody from the defensive line against Ohio State, they're going to run for 260 yards on you, and they're going to be patient. And that's what Ryan Day, I think, has grown just this year and being more patient with the running game, because he talked about maybe they went away from that a little too early against Notre Dame. They didn't go away from it. And then by sticking with it, it allows you to have more success with the passing game. And that's what I'm talking about with the being outnumbered. If they want to bring a 6th or 7th defender into the box, now who's defending? Like, everybody's single covered, and you might have 1 deep safety back there, and then you can work with guys over the middle. It's just really difficult for a lot of defenses to handle this offense if you don't have the talent. And it's hard to scheme up this offense because they can do whatever they want.
I got to say, one time last week, I had a Wisconsin guy on, and we were sizing up the matchup. He was kind of playing it out as we typically think of it. Ohio State wants to throw it constantly. They've got the athletic advantage, and we know what Wisconsin is, especially in the front 7. And, I just kind of interjected that this Ohio State run game may be different. It may not be that different on the stat sheet, but you have to watch it. You have to watch it be physical. The offensive line, the backs, Mayan Williams in particular, be physical. And that it was going to be fascinating because that's the Wisconsin bread and butter, is nobody bullies us around in the front 7. But I was also surprised when we started to dig into, and Kevin may have done this last week, dig into the rushing numbers from Ohio State during this pass happy era, 2017 and beyond, that Ohio State has had fairly decent success against Wisconsin in these other matchups on the ground.
Yeah, I'm looking to see if I have my notes up here still. I think I've already pitched them and moved on to Rutgers because somebody has to move on to Rutgers. But yeah, Ohio State's been able to run the ball pretty well against the Badgers. We still have the bad taste in the mouths of where Ohio State wasn't necessarily able to run against certainly the team up north. There were some issues against Oregon, but Ohio State traditionally has been able to move the ball on the ground against the Badgers for as great as the defenses have been under Jim Leonhard. And it certainly wasn't any different. But, I think this was just a much more lunch pail, blue collar, knock the snot out of you type of running game that we saw here than maybe we've seen in some other instances. And, you sit there and you take a whole off season of hearing about how you're not tough, how this has turned into a finesse Pac-12 type of offense, and guys are going to take that stuff seriously. And it really looked like these guys wanted to leave the Badgers black and blue by the end of the game.
Yeah, they punched the bully in the mouth, that's for sure. They came right out and had Wisconsin on their heels. And this is not something that you typically see Wisconsin suffer from, is kind of being shell-shocked into a early 14 or 21-point lead. And they're really not built as a big comeback team, although Mertz is trying to build that reputation as a thrower. The tight end Cundiff, once he got injured, that was a huge blow for them too, because he's one of their best playmakers. So I never did anybody hear how he came out of that? Is he done for the year, or what?
Broken leg is what the reports were. Yeah,
that's terrible. So it just looked like a routine hit by Tanner McAllister, trying to get him down in space. And when you're a smaller guy, that's what you do, is you try to take the legs out of the bigger guy with the football. Tanner McAllister, as a side point, had perhaps his best game so far as a Buckeye with the interception, and he also denied them a touchdown with 5 seconds left in the first half on that fourth down bomb that he recovered and batted the pass away. So he's earned his stripes, I'd say, as a Buckeye. And we didn't even touch on the two freshmen or the two young defensive backs. I don't know what J.K. Johnson is classified. Did he redshirt last year, or is he considered a sophomore?
Redshirt freshman.
And the other guy, Jair Brown, is a true freshman. And Jair Brown really hadn't played much in the first 3 games. And they go out there, they did a bang-up job. I thought Wisconsin had good receivers, and they barely threw for like 125 yards against 2 guys making their first career start at cornerback. I don't know. As I said, I thought Wisconsin had a decent enough passing game that Mertz would probably approach 200 yards, but he wasn't even close. So I don't know. I guess that's good for them.
Yeah, well, obviously he made the one really bad throw that needed to be so much further to the sideline on the pick by McAllister, where he cut in front, took it down to the 15-yard line. That was underthrown, and that was a mammoth mistake there. How much of the defensive effort do you guys think was Ohio State? Because, you guys are pointing out some outstanding plays, and McAllister was phenomenal, especially on those 2 plays that were, near plays of the game on the defensive side, versus the Wisconsin lackluster showing between Mertz and maybe the other strengths of the team typically not being what they typically are.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say this is a Wisconsin offense that scored 14 points against Washington State. So keep that in mind. Ohio State held the running game in check. I think Braylon Allen had 100 of his yards, like 98 yards rushing in the fourth quarter when the game was well in doubt. I don't think this is a very good Wisconsin offense. It's not an elite Wisconsin offensive line. Braylon Allen is very good, but they don't have a lot around him. And for J.K. Johnson and Jair Brown to grade out as champions in this game, it kind of also tells you the level of receiver that they were going against, in my opinion. They were both they did very well at corner, but they weren't really challenged by what Wisconsin had to give them. And even with that, you look at Wisconsin's schedule, and there is still a road to 10-2 because of who they're playing.
Yeah, and it's not a great Wisconsin team, but they weren't that good last year. They were fringe top 25 good. They went 8-4 in the regular season. This looks to be a fairly similar output out of Wisconsin. And there seems to be this argument when you look at Michigan in particular, but a few other teams across the country that at least up until last week had yet to play anyone, that, well, the defense is that they're just completely crushing, dominating them. And I understand that point. Now, to compare the UConns and Hawaiis of the world to Wisconsin is obviously a complete joke. And Ohio State, I don't care what the final score is. Like, I had a Michigan commenter or 2 yesterday try to convince me that last year's Wisconsin-Michigan game was similar, just because the final score was somewhere in the range at 38-17, somewhere in the range of this score, that those were similar contests. And I was like, you either are just looking at 2 final scores or you've never watched a football game in your life. Those are 2 completely, we're talking about a game that was, in duress into the fourth quarter at Camp Randall last year with Michigan, Wisconsin, a 1-score game. Then it widened versus this play 1 on, it was just a complete demolition. No comparison.